What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Erdell, and in today's video we go over the Pirc Defense, one of the most hyper-dynamic and dangerous chess openings out there right now for black against the move e4, in which case we're simply going to play the move d6, reaching the Pirc Defense at move 1. Now really by playing the move d6, we're simply trying to control the dark squares of e5 and c5, both very key squares in this opening. And usually guys, an e4 player against the move d6 is going to go, wait, you're going to let me take the center, and they're going to play the move d4. Now against this, we're simply going to continue with knight f6, attacking that pawn on e4, and now against a move like knight c3, we can continue with the main line of g6. I know some of you are probably wondering, wait a second, why are we playing moves like d6 and g6, allowing white to simply take control of the center? Well guys, we're allowing white to take the center, but in return, we're going to focus on developing our pieces very rapidly with moves like bishop g7 and castling kingside, and eventually break through with either e5 or c5, putting pressure on that center and trying to find very dangerous and hyper-dynamic counter-attacking chances. Now guys, in today's video specifically, we're going to be covering what to do against the Austrian attack with f4. Here white's going, look, you're going to play the move d6 and then g6, let me take full control of the center. And usually after this, they're going to play moves like knight f3, bishop g3, castle kingside, and hope to enjoy an advantage in space. But as we're going to see in this video, black has a very nice game here, and this is actually one of my favorite lines to play against. Now here we're going to play the move bishop g7, and guys, the main line here is simply playing knight f3, but let's cover real quick what happens if white plays the move e5. I mean, why can't white just steamroll us in this position, throwing their pawns to f4 and d4, and then throwing a pawn all the way down to e5? Well, in my opinion, this is actually a mistake, because we're going to play knight fd7, and now following a move like knight f3, we're going to play c5, putting a ton of pressure on the center of the board at move 6. And now white really has a big decision to make. The best move here, and it's not even close, is taking the pawn on d6. But let's cover a couple options that white has in this position. Now first off, I don't really think we need to be worried about white taking our pawn on c5. We're not going to take back on c5. We're going to take towards the center with d takes e5. Notice here how we're now attacking both f4 and c5. And if a move like f takes e5, there have been master and grandmaster level players that have continued here with moves like knight takes e5, castling kingside, queen a5, even the move knight c6, I personally kind of like. I mean, right now we are down a pawn, but we have not 1, 2, but 3 pieces all attacking that pawn on e5. This knight on d7 is also attacking the pawn on c5. We're going to castle kingside here with queen a5 ideas in the air, and I think that black has a very nice game. I would take black here every single time, without question. So guys, against this move c5, trying to put pressure on d4, if our c5 pawn is taken, we're simply going to take towards the center, continue with a move like knight c6 or any of the other options I just showed you, and black has a very nice game. Now what happens if white tries to hold on to this center and keep it intact with a move like bishop e3? Well, here we'll just continue to develop with castling kingside yet again. If they want to take on c5, okay, we'll take on e5. And if a move like queen d2, we can actually now start to chip away at this pawn structure and just start trading off pawns. I mean, let's just take the pawn on d4, and then the very next move, take on e5. I mean, if white wants to keep trading down and play a move like knight takes e5, okay, we'll continue to trade down. And if a move like f takes e5, I mean, eventually this pawn is going to find its home on e5. We're going to play the move knight c6. And in this position, we have 1, 2, 3 pieces all attacking that pawn on e5, queen a5 ideas in the air also attacking that pawn. I just don't see how this pawn's going to last in this game forever, and I think that black is simply better. You plug this into a computer program, it's going to give you a minus 1.5 advantage for black. So needless to say guys, against the move c5, there's really a lot of different moves here that can get white in trouble very quickly. Now what about the best move of e takes d6? Surprisingly, we're not going to take back the pawn on d6, but we're simply going to castle kingside. And by playing this, we're giving white the opportunity to make a mistake by taking either the pawn on e7 or the pawn on c5. If white takes one of these pawns, black is simply better. Let's first cover the move d takes e7. Why is this such a big mistake? It seems as if, at least for a second, white is simply up 2 pawns. Well, here we're going to take, and now we're down 1 pawn, checking the king on e1. And notice here, if a move like bishop e2, we can simply play c takes d4. If a move like knight b5, we play knight c6, and black has a very solid game there and a huge edge. And if the move knight takes d4 is played, this may seem like the obvious move, but white's in big trouble after the move knight b6, guys. Remember this position, guys. Take on d4, and following knight takes d4, knight b6. What is the point of this move? Well, really, we're not trying to get this knight to c4 or d5 right away. What we're trying to do is play the move rook d8, and notice how dangerous of a threat this is. For example, if we played this move right now against the move castling kingside, there's really no way for white to hold on to this knight. I mean, if the move bishop e3, thank you for the bishop. And if the move knight c to b5 trying to hang on to that knight, we just play a6, and all of a sudden we're attacking both the knight on b5 and the knight on d4. White simply can't hold on to everything. So what happens if white sees this very dangerous idea of rook d8 attacking that knight that is pinned to the queen on d1 and plays a move like knight b3? Well, we're going to play rook d8 anyways, attacking the opponent's queen. And now against a move like bishop d2, we're going to play knight c4. Just throw our knight in there, attacking d2, b2, and e3. And notice here how white actually can't castle, because we're simply going to take the bishop on d2. And after knight takes d2, play queen e3 with check. And the very next move, snatch that knight off the board. This position is resignable for white. So guys, as we just covered against this move knight b6, knight b3 doesn't really work because we're able to play rook d8 followed by knight c4, and black is simply winning. What about a move like knight b1, trying to get in this c3 idea, holding on to the knight? Well, against this, we're simply going to continue with knight c6. And yeah, I mean, against castling kingside and knight takes d4, they didn't fully lose a piece because they're able to take our knight back. But now we have bishop takes d4 with check, and following the move king h1, I mean, guys, look, there's a ton of different moves here that we can play. We can continue with ideas like bishop f5, bishop f6. There's a ton of different moves here that give black the edge. But the best move is the crazy-looking knight a4. I mean, just throwing our knight to a4, attacking the pawn on b2. And notice here, white is in some serious trouble. I mean, if the move queen c2, trying to hold on to that pawn, we play bishop f5, kicking that queen around, followed by rook c8, yet again gaining a tempo on that queen. If the move queen b3 is played, okay, thank you for the bishop on e2. And if white takes the knight on a4, as I just mentioned, yeah, we lost the knight, but in return, we take that bishop on e2. And notice here how there's really no safe squares for this rook to go. I mean, it could go to f1, but then we just play queen e1, and we get a back rank mate. And here, if the move queen d1, we can play bishop g4, threatening to take the queen. And the move queen takes e2, followed by rook e1, does not get white out of the situation because of the crushing bishop f2. Talk about an active bishop pair. I mean, really taking all the squares away from this rook. Black is simply winning. And notice here, white can't take the bishop on e2 because of rook d1 with check. And thank you for the back rank mate. So guys, going back to this position following castling kingside, if white does take our pawn on e7, we're going to take back with the queen, checking the opponent's king, take on d4, continue with a move like knight b6, and we're just playing very fun and exciting attacking chess. Now, what about the move d takes c5? Why is this a mistake? Well, guys, in this opening, what we're really trying to do is rapidly develop our pieces. We played bishop g7, very active bishop. We castled kingside. We have a knight on d7. Notice here how we are actually ahead in development. White has spent all this time taking our pawns, and now they only have 2 pieces developed. We have 2 pieces developed, and our king is castled. And here we can continue with a move like rook e8. Honestly here, guys, I think it's the best idea for white to just play a move like bishop e2, castle kingside, and try to hang on for dear life, allowing us to take both of those pawns back on c5 and d6. But what happens if white goes, look, I'm up 2 pawns and I like being up pawns. Let me take the pawn on e7. Well, yet again, white is simply losing. We're going to take back with the queen, and against a move like bishop e2, we can now continue with knight c6. And notice here, guys, I mean, we have ideas like knight takes c5, getting this bishop and this rook involved on d8, attacking the queen. We simply have a huge attacking edge. And here, white can't ever castle kingside because we simply take that knight off the board, this bishop flying out of nowhere. We take now the bishop on e2, which is no longer defended. And here, yet again, we're simply crushing this game. So guys, going back to this castling kingside move, taking both on e7 and taking on c5 are simply going to give us very crushing attacking games. It's not a good idea for white to take either of these pawns. Most of the time, they probably will. But what happens if they notice that taking these pawns are not a good idea and they simply continue with a move like bishop e3? Well, yet again, our attacking ideas do not stop. We're now going to take back on d6, and against a move like queen d2, play knight c6. I mean, notice how much pressure we're really putting on towards the center of the board, specifically that pawn on d4. If a move like d takes c5, we'll simply take back with the knight with a very active game. And following castling queenside, we play queen a5, putting pressure on c3, putting pressure on a2. And against a move like king b1, we can now play knight f6. Getting this knight into the game, we have potential knight g4 and knight e4 ideas, and on top of that, we can now get our bishop involved onto that f5 square. As I mentioned, knight g4 is a key idea, attacking that bishop on e3 and also putting more pressure on that d4 pawn. So here we've seen it 8 times at the master and grandmaster level, white playing the move h3, trying to prevent this knight g4 move, but they can't stop everything. We're going to play bishop f5, activating our bishop, and notice the activity of our pieces here. A very active queen on a5, an active bishop pair on f5 and g7, which are going to be very dangerous once this pawn on d4 falls, and a knight on f6 and a knight on c6 that are ready to jump in at a moment's notice, not to mention these rooks that are going to really give us some extra back rank power. What happens here if white plays a move like bishop d3? From a logical standpoint, this makes sense. They're getting attacked, why not try to trade down the pieces? When you're attacking, you don't want to trade down, and when you're defending, you do want to trade down because it gets rid of their attacking presence. But here we actually have the very aggressive idea of b5. Guys, this is just the meat and potatoes of Pirc Defense chess. We're simply attacking on the queen side of the board. And now white does have a big decision to make. They can take on c5 and they can take on b5 with either the knight or the bishop. But in either case, they're in big trouble. And if they don't take, we have b4 ideas, c4 ideas, and we're simply going to break this game open. Let's first cover the move knight takes b5. Why can't white just take this knight? It seems, at least for a second, that white is just trying to trade queens, attacking our pawn on d6. Well, we now have the key idea of knight b4, threatening to capture that pawn on a2. And against a move like knight c3, defending that threat, we're simply going to continue by capturing that bishop on d3, and then continuing with knight fd5, attacking that knight on c3, which is defending that pawn on a2. And here white's only real move here is a3, trying to get rid of that queen takes a2 threat following taking of the knight. But now we simply take the bishop on e3. And now if the queen takes back, we can simply continue with knight c6, bringing this knight back. But yet again, notice how much pressure we're putting on that d4 pawn. And if white ever takes the pawn on c5, well, we simply take the knight on c3. We continue with a move like queen takes a3, rook b8 in the air the very next move. And black has a simply crushing game. You plug this into a computer program, it's going to tell you that if white plays perfectly, we have a mate in 5 for black. Now, y'all, following this move, knight takes e3, some of you may be wondering, wait a second, why did they take the knight and allow our knight to run away? Why not take the knight on b4 and then take the knight on e3? But guys, here we're not going to take back with the queen, but we're going to take back with the c-pawn. They can win our knight, but we're also going to win theirs. If a move like knight e2, thank you for the exchange. And if queen takes e3, we're going to take back that knight on c3. And guys, with a pawn on c3, a queen on a5, and these rooks about to jump into the attacking game, this is just not looking good for the king on b1. So guys, following a very aggressive move, b5, expanding on the queen side of the board, knight takes b5 does not work because we're going to continue with that knight b4 idea, threatening the mating pattern of queen takes a2, followed by queen a1 checkmate. And once that knight goes back, preventing that move, we can take on d3, get our other pieces involved, and black has a simply crushing position. What about the move bishop takes b5? This seems like a much better option, attacking our knight and allowing this knight on c3 to defend the pawn on a2. Well, this doesn't work either because we continue with knight b4, attacking the pawn on c2 with both our knight and our bishop on f5. And here, if a move like rook c1, we simply continue with knight e4, crushing idea. Notice here, if the knight takes on e4, we simply win the game with queen takes a2. And now if this queen decides to save its life with a move like queen e2, we capture the knight on c3, which was just defending the pawn on a2, and we have a game over. So guys, against the move rook c1, we're going to continue with knight e4, and black is simply crushing that game. Notice also how against the move bishop d3, we simply capture off that bishop, and then play knight d5, and we actually just transpose into the variation we just covered, in which case we saw knight takes b5 and knight c3. And here against a move like bishop a4, this seems like a very resourceful move. I mean, bringing this bishop back, stopping that queen takes a2 threat, and also stopping c2. But now we're just going to continue to mount the pressure, play a move like rook a b8, and then really no matter what white plays the next move, even a3, we're not going to run away, guys. We're not going to play passive chess with a move like knight a6 or knight d5. We're going to play knight e4, threatening to capture the queen with check. And once that knight captures back, we simply continue by snatching off that bishop on a4. If white decides to play the move a takes b4, okay. Thank you for the knight on e4. And against a move like rook c1, we can continue with c takes b4. I mean, just talk about an active game here. A pawn on b4, queen on a4, our rook on b8 is very active. Our bishop on e4 is absolutely crushing white here. b3 on the way, and white can resign. You plug this into a computer program, it's going to tell you that queen d3 is the best move for white, simply giving up the queen. So guys, following bishop takes b5, it is true that after knight b4 and rook c1, knight e4 is simply crushing. Notice also how after bishop d3, we simply capture off that bishop, bring our knight to d5, and we transpose into the line that we covered earlier. And here if a move like bishop a4, at first sight, this seems very resourceful. I mean, it's stopping queen takes a2 ideas, it's defending the pawn on c2. Is white going to be okay? Well guys, in this position, we don't need to try to find anything forceful. We can simply continue to add the pressure. Keep the tension, keep putting pressure on white with the move rook a b8, simply directing this rook towards the opponent's king. In chess, guys, we want to constantly get more pieces involved, and this rook on b8 is obviously much more active than that rook on a8. And really, no matter what white plays here, I mean, even a move like a3, we can continue with knight e4, threatening to capture the queen with check. And if white takes the knight on e4, okay, thank you for the bishop. If white wants to take off a very active knight on b4, okay, thank you for the knight on e4. And against a move like rook c1, continue by capturing that pawn on b4. Notice here, guys, the activity of all our pieces. This is simply crushing for black. Here, according to the computer, the best move is queen d3, simply giving up the queen, because we have this very dangerous b3 idea in the air, threatening a mate in one. And notice how this pawn on c2 can't move because it's pinned to the king on b1. Guys, this is winning for black. So guys, going back to this b5 move, taking both with the knight and the bishop does not work because of knight b4 putting the pressure on the white camp. Now, what if white sees that they shouldn't take this pawn on b5 and simply captures the pawn on c5, which is the best move for white? Well, now we can continue with b4, attacking the knight on c3, and now against a move like knight e2, we could simply take back on c5, even out the material, and black has a nice game. But we have more aggressive and attacking chess in us. We could play the move bishop takes d3. Notice here, if c takes d3, we play knight d5, activating the bishop on g7, putting pressure on the bishop on e3, and also knight c3 check ideas are in the air, simply blowing open the positioning of this king. And against a move like queen takes d3, we can simply continue with b3. Now, obviously, guys, this is move 16. This position has never been seen at the master level for a couple moves now, but I'm just trying to show you guys the creativity and the attacking chances that you can have in this opening. The computer recommends the move b3, and when I first saw this, I was wondering, wait a second, why would we ever play this move? White has 1, 2, 3 different ways that they can take the pawn on b3, but they all lead to a losing position. And if you don't take the pawn on b3, we're simply going to start trading off pawns, open up the positioning of this king, get our rooks involved on b8 and c8, and black is simply crushing. Now, what's wrong with queen takes b3? Well, the issue with queen takes b3 is that we have rook b8 attacking the queen, whole idea being the very next move, our rook and our bishop are going to be putting pressure on b2. Notice with our rook on b8 and our bishop on b2, both are putting pressure on that b2 pawn. So if queen takes b3 is played, we play rook b8, and the very next move literally plays something like knight e4 or knight d5, opening up both the bishop and the rook to that b2 pawn, and black is winning. What if white takes with either the pawn on c2 or a2? Let's say a takes b3. What's wrong with this? Well, we now have knight b4 attacking the queen, and this makes things very hard for white. Notice here how queen d2 doesn't work, because we simply play queen a2 check, followed by queen a1 with mate. Queen c3 doesn't work because we continue with knight e4, continuing to chase around that queen. Queen c4 doesn't really do anything because we play d5, forcing that queen to c3 or d4 with, yet again, that knight e4 idea. And if the move queen d4 right away, we have queen a2 check, and after a move like king c1, we can take the pawn on c5. And here, guys, white is simply a few moves away from losing this game. For example, if white captures the pawn on c5, looking to attack our knight on b4, we don't really care about our knight. We're simply going to play knight e4, attacking the queen. Whole idea being, if this queen moves literally anywhere, we have queen a1 with mate, because this knight takes away that d2 square. So y'all, going back to this position, e5 is just not a good idea for white, pushing all these pawns up like crazy, because we simply play knight d7, c5, castle kingside, and it may seem as if white is getting the attacking chances, but ironically, it's black that get the attacking chances against the move e5. Now, what happens if white doesn't go for this and plays the much better move, knight f3, the main line following the Austrian attack? Well, here we simply castle kingside, and now against a move like bishop d3, we play knight c6. Now, many are probably wondering, wait a second, why would we ever want to play the move knight c6, allowing the move d5, simply kicking our knight around? Well, this is exactly what we want. We're going to play the move knight b4, attacking the bishop on d3. And really here, I mean, if white castles kingside, we're simply going to go up the bishop pair, and black has a solid game. And if the bishop goes to either e2 or c4, or even b5, I don't really care where the bishop goes, we're going to continue with c6. And notice all the pressure that we're currently putting on towards white's center. I mean, this is just not a comfortable position from the white perspective to play. I mean, yeah, white's pawns are very advanced, but they're being very aggressively attacked, with queen b6 ideas also in the air, pouncing down on f2 and g1. Now here, if a move like a3, that's okay. We can play knight a6, reroute our knight to c7, putting more pressure on d5. And if white goes, look, I'm just going to castle kingside, and I'm not really worried about c takes d5 because I'm just going to take back with the e-pawn, and I'm going to have two defenders against two attackers. Well, yet again, we have that queen b6 idea. And against king h1, we now play queen c5. And guys, with our knight pair and our queen on c5, attacking the pawn on d5, I just don't see any future in which this pawn can survive very long at all. So again, guys, following knight c6 against the main option of knight f3 and bishop d3 of the Austrian attack, we're not worried about d5. We're simply going to play knight b4, attack the bishop, continue with c6, put a ton of pressure on white's center, and we're just playing chess. Now, the main move here for white, which we're going to cover at the end of this video, is e5, attacking our knight on f6. But what happens if white plays the move castling kingside? Why is it generally considered to be not the best option to castle kingside? It's because we're going to be the ones that play e5, really trying to create some counter-attacking chances right in the center of the board on f4 and d4. Notice here, if a move like bishop e3, we simply continue with knight g4, attacking that bishop, putting even more pressure on that pawn on d4. And here white does have a big decision to make, a very hard decision to make. I mean, bishop e3 may look good, but as we just covered, knight g4 simply makes that move look very bad. And here white could take the pawn on e5 with either the f pawn or the d pawn, or even play the move d5. Now against the move d5, we're going to continue with knight d4. And I know many of you are probably wondering, okay, wait, why can't white just take the pawn on e5? I mean, if we take on f3, this queen's going to get more involved in the game with bishop g5 ideas in the air. Well, guys, we're not going to take the knight on f3. In fact, we're simply going to take on e5, and yes, at least for 1 second, we're allowing white to simply go up a pawn. But now we have the key idea, guys. Remember this. I actually recommend you guys memorize this line. Against knight takes e5, capture that pawn on e4. They win a pawn, we win a pawn, and they can take our knight on e4 with, say, the bishop, but we're simply going to get that knight right back. I mean, if a move like bishop f4 trying to trade off, we're going to play bishop g7, keeping our dark square strong around our king, keeping our king secure here, and then we'll just continue with moves like rook e8, knight f5, and we're just playing chess. But what happens if white plays a move like bishop h6? This looks good at first sight. I mean, it's attacking the rook. And if a move like bishop g7, okay, we trade off, and then all of a sudden, white wins the knight on d4. But guys, bishop h6, actually turns out to be a huge mistake, because in Pirc Defense type fashion, we're going to play aggressive chess with queen h4, attacking the bishop on h6, and black is simply crushing this game. For example, yeah, I mean, white could take our rook on f8, but now we're going to play bishop takes h2 with check. Notice how we took with the bishop to prevent this king from running away. And after the move king h1, we have bishop g3 with check, taking away that f2 square, and following the move king g1, queen h2, game over. Now going back to this position really quickly, guys, many of you are probably wondering, okay, wait, after knight takes e5 and knight takes e4, I totally get that after taking the knight on e4, we simply get that knight on e5, but why can't white just play the move knight takes f7, right? I mean, they're going to lose the knight anyways. Why not get a pawn out of it and then take the knight on e4? Well, guys, we're not going to take this knight on f7. We're going to play the intermediate move knight takes e3. Here in this position, we were even in material. White got a pawn. We got a pawn. White got a pawn. We got a piece. And if white wants to keep taking pieces off the board like crazy and take our queen, okay, we'll take the queen off the board, and we're simply going to be ahead of material. And here, if a move like b takes c3, okay, that's fine. We'll take the knight on f7. And yes, at least for 1 second, I mean, following rook takes f7 and king takes f7, it seems as if following c takes d4, white has successfully gone up a pawn. They have 6 pawns. We got 5. It seems as if this knight takes f7 move, this heroic play, simply got white a better endgame. But we simply take that pawn on d4 right back. And on top of evening out the material, we don't only have check, but we're going to say thank you for the rook on a1. So y'all, following the move castling kingside and e5, we're not really worried about d5 because of knight d4, throwing our knight in there. And yeah, white could win our pawn on e5, but once that knight takes on e5, we have knight takes e4, and black has a very active game. Now, what if white doesn't push the pawn to d5, but instead decides to capture the pawn on e5? Now, the main move, which we're going to cover, is f takes e5, but what about the move d takes e5? Why can't white just take this pawn? I don't really think that we need to be too worried about this move, because after d takes e5, it may appear as if white can simply win that pawn with f takes e5, but we're simply going to take that pawn right back. Whole idea being, white could go up a piece for about half a second before we play queen d4 with check, and after a move like king h1, take that knight right off the board. If a move like bishop f4, we have queen c5, we're going to play moves like bishop e6, knight h5 attacking the bishop. We're going to have a very active bishop on g7 as well as our queen on c5, put a rook on d8. We're simply going to be playing chess, and I really don't think that black has anything to worry about here. So y'all, we just covered the move d takes e5, in which case we simply take back with the d pawn, and I really don't think that black has much to worry about there. What about the main move of f takes e5? Honestly, I don't think that this is much different at all. We're simply going to take back with the d pawn, whole idea being, if d takes e5, we have that knight takes e5 followed by queen d4 check idea, if white does in fact capture our knight in the center of the board. And here, if the move d5 is played, we're not going to play passive chess, guys. We're not going to play knight b8 or knight e7. We're going to play knight d4, throwing our knight into that central square. Yet again, if knight takes e5, we play knight takes e4, looking to take that knight back on e5. And if the move knight takes d4, we can simply capture back on d4 with our pawn. And now against a move like knight e2, there's really no hard opening theory here, like you have to play this move. We really do have a lot of flexibility here. It really just depends on what you prefer. We've seen master level players play c6. There's also moves like queen e7, putting pressure on e4, rook e8, putting pressure on e4. Knight h5 is also a good move, defending that pawn on d4. There's a lot of different ways that we can play here, and black has the edge in every single one of them. So y'all, going back to this key position of knight c6 against the moves knight f3 and bishop d3 of the Austrian attack, we're not really worried about d5 at all because of knight b4, and we're not worried about a move like castling kingside because we're going to be the ones that get to play the move e5. And if you guys memorize the lines shown in this video, you're going to be much more prepared than your opponents in that position. What happens if white does push with the move e5? Obviously, e5 is not possible for us anymore, but I still think that black is completely okay. We're simply going to take that pawn on e5. Notice here, if knight takes e5, we simply win that pawn on d4. So that really does leave white with two different options, taking with the d pawn or taking with the f pawn. F takes e5 is the main move here. But let's first cover what happens if d takes e5. Against d takes e5, we're going to take control of the center with our knight, centralizing our minor piece. with knight d5, putting pressure on c3 and putting some pressure on f4. Most of the time here, guys, white's not going to play a move like castling kingside, allowing us to even have the opportunity to take that knight on c3 and really damage their pawn structure on the queen side of the board. So they're probably going to play a move like bishop d2, simply trying to hold this position together. And we're now going to play bishop g4, guys. We cannot play defensively in the Pirc. We can't play a move like e6 and give ourselves a tall pawn. We have to play bishop g4, pinning that knight on f3. And if a move like h3 is ever played, that's okay. We'll give up our bishop for the knight, and then we'll continue with a move like knight b d4, threatening to capture that bishop on d3. And if a move like bishop e4 trying to save the bishop, okay, we play knight d4, attacking the queen, and also threatening to capture that pawn on c2, really forcing the move queen d1, in which case we can now yet again play aggressive and attacking chess with f5, trying to distract this bishop from the pawn on c2. And here black has a very playable game. So y'all, going back to this position, in which case we took that pawn on e5, white could take with the d-pawn, and against this, I recommend centralizing that knight on d5. What about the move f takes c5? I actually don't recommend centralizing this knight, but playing the move knight h5. Notice in the previous variation, this pawn on d4 did not exist because it took on e5, but now the pawn does, and it's the primary target for us in this position. In fact, right now we're simply threatening to win the pawn, and if a move like bishop e3, we can't take the pawn, but we can continue to put the pressure on white with bishop g4, pinning that knight, which is a very key defender of that pawn on d4, to the queen on d1. And if a move like bishop e2, simply trying to hold this game together, we can play a move like f6, trying to chip away at the central pawns on d4 and d5. And against a move like e takes f6, okay, we'll take back with the e-pawn. And against a move like castling kingside, play f5. And against a move like queen d2, continue with queen d6, activating our most powerful piece. And now our next moves can include ideas like king h8, rook a d8, even f4, attacking the bishop on e3. We're going to continue to put pressure on white's center, and specifically that pawn on d4. Now, obviously, we just covered the move queen d6, but we do need to be careful not to go too quickly. For example, bishop takes f3 followed by knight takes d4 is simply a huge mistake. This may seem tempting because it's like, look, let's get rid of the defender. Let's win a pawn on d4. It is true that right now we have 1 and 2 defenders on that knight, and white only has 2 attackers, so they can't take the knight right away, but they could simply just take the pawn on b7, and after a move like rook b8, play bishop d5 with check against our king, and then take the knight on d4, going back to this position against queen d2. We don't want to be too rushed in taking that knight. Let's just play good fundamental chess, play queen d6, get all of our pieces involved, and we're going to have ourselves a very nice and playable middle game position. If you'd like to learn the theory behind the Pirc defense as a whole against all of the main variations, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn the top 10 chess openings for black against the move d4, click the video to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.